This is Anyaoku-Popoola, your girl here with the Miss IJ's Kids Inclusive Podcast. And I just want to say thank you again to all the guests who've been logging on and downloading and just putting a lot of traction on what we do here, shining a light on inclusive education on the continent of Africa and in the diaspora. And today I have with me Miss Basirat, and she is also, I would call her a researcher in the field of inclusive education. And I would love for her to just talk about who she is and what she does and why I have her on the show today, because she's also about all things inclusive, especially with students and individuals living with disabilities, either in the continent of Africa or in Europe or Americas. But she's definitely been around in this field. And it's been such a pleasure getting to know her for such a short time. And I know that you will absolutely be impressed with her resources and knowledge in this field. So Ms. Basirat, thank you so much for joining us and welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
So you are currently now in the UK, right?
I am in Nigeria. I am doing my field work.
Okay, super. I love it. Isn't that interesting? I just got back from Nigeria and I was doing my research a couple of months ago. So
oh wow!
I know.
We miss each other.
I know. We were just talking about how we are both getting our doctorates, and your thesis is she's a Ph.D. candidate, and she is going to the University of Cambridge. And your topic is on what? If you could just talk about that a little bit.
All right. My topic is on educating children with neurodevelopmental disorders in a Nigerian context. And I am looking at perspectives and lived experiences. So what is this about? We are aware that there are inclusive education policies in Nigeria, but implementation has been a problem. Yeah. And so why has implementation been a problem? We don't know. There's so many reasons. Some factors have been identified, but something that remains missing is the perspectives and lived experiences of the people that the policies, is attempting to support. And so for me, I find it, really important to get back to the root of the problem, understand exactly what people are going through, because without, it's a complicated problem. And without thoroughly understanding the problem, you're unable to provide solutions. So I'm taking a step back to understand the problem. What are people's lived experiences? And then why children with neurodevelopmental disorders? What you will find is within the available research for Nigeria, work has already been done for some categories of children with disabilities, usually children with, not even children, people with visual and sensory impairments, right? Rather than people with neurodevelopmental disorders or intellectual disabilities. So there's sort of a reinforcement of that unwritten hierarchy when it comes to disabilities. Like some disabilities rank lower than some others. So you find these other ones, deaf and hearing impairments, visual impairments, but you hardly find, when it comes to education in particular, you hardly find anything about this other category. And so that's why I'm looking into that category. Plus, I've always been interested in this category. When the Winford Centre, which is the charity that I run, when that charity was launched, our focus was on neurodevelopmental disorders. So it was only natural that, I look into this area when it came to research. So that is what it is. So I'm talking to parents, and I'm also going to be talking to children, to understand what their perspectives on education are and what their lived experiences have been. And at the end of the day, my aim is to privilege these voices that are seldom heard, and to situate, them within the context of people-centered policy making, so that when we're making policies that reflect the context that we're in, not just policies that look like copy and paste, that sort of thing.
Right. Oh, goodness gracious. You don't understand. So, okay, I don't want to get too academic, but I just want to say that I was expecting this, but this is, I use that word a lot, a treat for me, because, doing the research in inclusive education, just with special education in general, it's a small group of people, small group of professionals in it. And to find someone who's actually doing what you do as a study, who's actually in Nigeria doing what you do as a study, and then is literally like, you can open up my thesis chapters and everything she said is in my chapters. And I'm like, oh my goodness, I'm staring at my thesis paper. And I absolutely love it. So we have some PhD and doctoral people who listen to the podcast. So I know that they would absolutely appreciate this connection. It's like finding the right article in like a needle in a haystack. So I really
Oh
appreciate
my,
everything
don't even
that
go
you have
there.
said.
Don't even go there.
No, but
Don't
what
go there.
what
The
you say is
paucity
so
of data
vital.
is,
Yeah, what you're saying is so vital. And I think what makes what you do and what I'm doing is, even though it's the same, it's slightly different because I'm just looking at education enrollment and things like that. But you're looking at a group within a marginalized group that, again, voices that have not been heard. And, when we see, like autism and we see, disabilities from the global context, sometimes you forget that people in Nigeria who have disabilities, they're not even seen or heard. So the fact that you're doing what you're doing, it's such an amplification, bringing that to the forefront. And not knocking some of the other bigger organizations who are doing things like, we know them and we're appreciative for that platform. But sometimes it's the little smaller organizations like the Winford Center. You're the founder of the Winford Center. And I wanted you to talk more about that, who are on the ground, partnering with other organizations on the ground who see these lived experiences every day, who hear these lived experiences every day, who have to talk to mothers and fathers who don't have the resources, and has nothing to do with them, but a lot to do with what is provided to them and what they can do. And so it's definitely something I'm passionate about. Everything, like I talk about is like inclusive education, and it's just good to see somebody who's really wrapped into the same just passions. And so I wanted you to just talk about Basirat. So who are you and what's your story? And if you could just talk again about why you became so committed to individuals with disabilities, especially neurological. If you could just talk a little bit more about that. Where did that passion come from? What sparked your fire?
who's Basirat? So I'm a mom. I have two kids. Would I say I'm fun loving, but I enjoy quiet life too. So I love sleeping. That's me when I'm not doing all of this. And I just love being in my own corner. So what led to the Winford Center? I think I'll take all of this together so that you
Mhm.
see how one led
Led to
to
the other.
another.
Okay.
Um, I was living in the UK. I had people living in the UK
Mhm.
as well. And I think back in 2000 and 13, no, 2000 and yeah, 12, 13, thereabout, someone really close to me relocated from England to Nigeria.
Okay.
And before the person left, I knew they had a child that, you know, at that time, I would not have called it disabilities, but I knew the child had challenges. Let's just put it that way. But
Mhm.
I also knew, they already got started with the NHS in terms of supporting the child with their education and all of that. And then they had to relocate. And when they got back to Nigeria, they weren't in Lagos.
Mhm.
For those who don't know Nigerian, Lagos is the what I call economic capital of Nigeria.
Yeah.
Whilst Abuja is the political capital, Lagos is
Yes.
like the economic center. And so they weren't in Lagos, they weren't in any of this other big cities. They were just in one of the states. And I heard a story. So in just keeping up with them, I heard a story about the child, how the child had gone to school and the child was picked up in a really sorry state, and how they were struggling, to find a school that could support the child. And I was like, this can't be that hard. It can't be that
It's just
difficult.
education,
But
right? Hmm.
it's just school, perhaps because you have just relocated. You're probably overwhelmed. how about I help you to search online while you deal with the other things that come with relocation, right? I'll do the search online. I'm sure there will be loads because whatever it is that the boy has, and at that time I didn't even I wasn't sure what the condition was because I'm not sure that there was a diagnosis at that time, but I was positive that whatever it was the child had, there'll be people in Nigeria who have similar and would be dealing with it some way. And so I said, let me help you with the search. And I started searching and I really couldn't find anything. And at first I thought, okay, at this time, right, I was working in a bank. I felt like maybe I didn't have enough time. I didn't commit enough time to it. And so the more I searched, the more I found that, look, this appears to be a problem on its own. Like this problem exists. I mean, if I didn't have to do this, I never would have come across this problem. And I was making inquiries, few people that I knew, is this how it is? And the response was just not encouraging. And I spoke to someone else who also knew the person. I was like, look, I feel this really deeply in my heart, like I need to do something about this problem. I mean, it's this person. What if it turned out to be me someday? It could be anybody, it could be any of us. Would we say until this happens to us before we do something? It's happening to someone else. Why don't we do something? And for me, so there was also this thing like I felt like I was in the UK, and naturally I looked up to the UK and felt like they probably have it figured out here. So how about I serve as a conduit? I have the privilege to be here and I have resources. So how about I channel these resources to Nigeria? So what they have going for them here, I can help channel that to Nigeria. So if the issue is education, and so you see why education was a natural area for me to go into. If the thing is education, how about we look at how education is done in the UK, particularly for the group of children, and see what we can do for people in Nigeria. And again, it was either I support the one child or I do something bigger. For me, it didn't make sense to just do the one child because I felt in the process of helping one, you can help many others. So there's no point doing one. And this just became like a burden, on my heart. Like if I didn't do, I became restless about it. And that was what led to the Winford Centre. So I spoke to a few people, the trustees, and I said, look, this is what we're going to do about this. Let's get this thing started. And that was how the Winford Centre started. When the Winford Centre started, again, I was living in the UK. Naturally, I thought, okay, UK centre, because I was thinking the way education is done in England versus whatever is going on in Nigeria. Of course, I did know that UK, send arrangement that has government input and so many other things going. So it wasn't going to be, a perfect replica, but there were things that we could borrow. So we decided to do a pilot program and do this pilot with 2 schools in Lagos to see if we could help 2 low-cost schools. Because again, there was another consideration, like this person was beginning to figure out, how to support this child and all of that. But how about we look at the people who support the masses, rather than the big end schools. Let's just look at, so let's try with low cost schools. Let's try 2 primary schools in Lagos, low cost schools, and see if that weren't previously inclusive and see if we can get them to become inclusive. So train them and get them to have practicum sessions with people with special needs schools, right? So it's not just theory.
Right.
And so we embarked on this pilot project, which was, how will I describe it? Revealing. that's the word I can use for it. There were a number of things that didn't quite go the way we wanted, but there were, which I'll call, the things that we learned. And there were quite a number of things that went the way we wanted. And so after the pilot project, I then, I came back to Nigeria so many other reasons. But I came back to Nigeria, and during this period, I was like, okay, I'm here. Let me spend time with the people on ground, because looks like I may have missed out something when it comes to contextualization. There are some things I took for granted. So I was born and raised in Nigeria, and I know about this context. And so I think I took that for granted because I thought I understood the context. And in some ways I did, except I didn't, when it came to this particular area, I didn't have as much understanding. And so I came to Lagos. I started talking to people who were already in the field. What are you doing? This is what the Winford Centre wants to do. We are not particularly interested in working directly with children. We want to find people who are already working with children and give them what they need to support this other group of children who are excluded. So schools and all of this other people. So those were the people that we were targeting. And when I got here, there were a few things that I started to find. Some, that confirmed the findings from the pilot project, and some others that were really new. But one thing was apparent, people were struggling. Education was a problem. And can I even say, at this time, I was not yet into research, but at the time we started Winford Centre, before we decided on the pilot project, we did a survey. We went into parent groups and did a survey of the problem areas, because that would give us an idea where we should, put our limited resources. And the first thing that came up was education. So in terms of, and I was quite surprised, because I thought people would put something like therapy services, as the biggest problem. But the first problem people complained about was education. And so that made us go into education. Anyway, after I got to Nigeria was when I made the decision I was going to do a PhD. I was like, okay, if I'm just going to do this, I might as well do a PhD on the back of it. Now, in doing the PhD as well, I wanted to work with schools. But this is the beautiful, beautiful thing about doing a PhD. It's not just the degree. It's not really the thesis. It's your thinking. It is the way you see things. And that was the thing that changed for me, that led me back to, working with parents and children for my field work. So got to started research, started engaging the literature. And first I found out that the grass wasn't necessarily greener on the other side. It was everyone's struggling. I mean, understandably, people might not be at the same stage or level of implementing inclusive education. I understand that, but it just started to feel like, wait, there's a problem here. So in theory, this whole inclusive education thing sounds fantastic. And honestly, in areas or in places where you're able to implement it, it has huge potentials to drive positive results for children who have disabilities. However, there were other problems, that were in the way. And these problems meant implementing inclusive education in places like Nigeria and other global South contexts was so difficult. We have level 1 problems, as I call them, poverty, all of everything on Maslow's first level
of needs.
Hierarchy of needs, that very first level, all of those things. And looking back at it, that there's a reason those things are at the base level. You understand? Because other things build on them. You don't have food, you're hungry, you don't have security, you don't have clothes, and you're talking about education. So these were, problems that were intersecting with the implementation. And so all of this together made me realize, look, this approach to inclusive education, where we feel like what has been said by a group of people is not the way. And so we've got to come back and look within the context and see
Yeah.
what is working and see what can we do. But before we see what is working, it's to understand the realities, what is
Mm-hmm.
going on. And I am doing that within a Southern theory context, framework, sorry,
Mm-hmm.
within a Southern theory framework, which focuses on, building knowledge within the global South. So let's see what's going on here. Let's understand what is going on here
Yeah.
so that at least when we decide, to put solutions in place, we are working with people's realities, not
Yeah.
what we think,
Yeah.
should work for them. So that really is the connection between who I am, how I go into the space, the Winford Centre, and my PhD.
No, I love it. And I think that everything you said is so brilliant. So when you were talking, I thought about when you said education in the UK. And I think for me, because I'm a special education teacher by career. So, and I started off not there. Like you said, you started in finance. I thought that was so interesting how you like move from one career to the other. But, our passion guides us and our passion leads us at the end of the day. We're like, what are we put on this earth to do? And I think when we figure out what those passions are and what our purpose is, you have no other choice but to just fall, forward in that direction. And so, I started off with something else like theater and like international relations. But when I started subbing in my daughter's school, and I ended up subbing in it was substitute teaching in a special education class. I had a few students that were minority from Nigeria, and that sparked it for me. It's like, wow, our students are getting the resources that they need, and it's not perfect because even with the state and the law, we have IDEA, which is the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, that made that way for students with disabilities to get a free and appropriate education. So I was thinking when you talked about the UK, I wondered what their laws were and what were those things that really made you take your experiences in the UK. Again, because I was born and raised in Nigeria, but came to the US for undergrad. And that's the story of some of us, right? We have we had the resources, we had the opportunity. Not everybody will have those resources. And not everybody actually chooses those resources to come overseas. They want to stay in Nigeria. And please, kudos to them. Why shouldn't us as a people have, a good educational system where we don't always have to go out to get it? And so it's a mixture of both worlds that I think can really be an advantage for us, either Nigerians in the diaspora or even Nigerians that are on in Nigeria at the time. I found it interesting that you said that education was one of the one major thing from parents and from your survey to be something that's important. So, my question for the podcast and for our session is, when you decided to go into education and you just decided to go full throttle with it, obviously you believe in education. Obviously you are
Oh, yes,
passionate
I do.
about, I mean, I know most Nigerians, like people look at us like overseas and they're like, Nigerians are always going to school, always going to school, and I don't know if it's because of our experiences back in, that's a whole podcast conversation, but our experiences, in Nigeria, not having those resources and saying, I'm going to go and get the education, I'm going to go and get the certificate, the paper, and I'm going to come back and see if I can reach back, to people who can, and to work with people who are already doing something, maybe that's our driving force. But have you given up? I don't think you have, but Mike, I'll just ask the question. Have you given up on our educational system in Nigeria? And
I mean, clearly I haven't. If I had, I wouldn't be doing this. I haven't.
exactly.
I mean, there's so many things that are discouraging. Excuse me.
It's okay.
There are too many discouraging things. And if you live here, or if you pay close attention to the news, you would find even more disturbing things. But I promise you, every country has something to grapple with.
Mhm.
And we can either stay focused on the negatives or just start to think of how to make it better.
Yeah.
When I started my PhD, right, I went with this drive. It still amuses me when I think about it. I went with this drive. My proposal was, you once I want to try out this thing that in 5 years I'd get X number of children. So we have this huge out of
Dreams.
school population,
Mhm.
millions of children out of school. Like, well, in 5 years, this idea will be able to take maybe like 5 million children out of,
Mhm.
back in school. Give it another 10 years, maybe we can scale it. I went big, and I'm sure my supervisor would have looked at me like, oh, I admire your
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
I
Yeah.
admire,
They
I admire your zeal.
yeah,
If only you know that these things don't quite work this
that
way.
way. Oh, I
But
got that too.
so,
Yeah, so like
so I haven't given up. I wouldn't say I have given up. And if you remember, education was the natural direction for me to go, because
Mhm.
what brought me here was education. It was the fact that a child wasn't getting the education that they
They
wanted, and
wanted.
so that the parents wanted, and they thought would be appropriate for the child, and so education naturally was the way to go. It really, at that time, it really had nothing to do with maybe my educational background or the value that I attached to education. It was just a problem that needed to be solved. And
Exactly.
I just went. Now, it is possible, perhaps subconsciously, there's a feeling I have about education, right? Which may have played a role in paying attention to that part.
Mhm.
I will rule that away, understanding that yes, education is valuable. Everyone should be able to access good education. I mean,
Yeah.
I what took me to England in the first place was
Mhm.
education.
Was education. That's
I
what it
I went there for my master's,
yeah.
and I stayed back. So yeah, so perhaps all of those things had a role to play in my subconscious. But at that time, when I made the decision, let's do education, it was just two things. The problem itself, that brought me to the whole disability space was
Yeah.
education. And then it because it was a new terrain, all I could do was just find out, so that I wasn't also walking blind, was
Yeah.
find out what is the problem you guys are facing. And surprisingly, it was education. So it,
Yep.
it was just a good place to start. And this survey, by the way, it
Mhm.
wasn't done with the parental groups that were used were parental groups of predominantly children with autism. So it wasn't even just like,
Mhm.
maybe CP groups, cerebral palsy groups, or other disability groups. It was targeted at parents of children who had autism spectrum disorder in Nigeria. And so it was targeted.
So how do you, because I like what you say that you feel like your focus has really been maybe with parents whose children are on the autism spectrum and having neurodivergent children or even adults, we have them too. So what do you think are the differences? Because I think in my research, I know that when someone sees a physical disability, especially in Nigeria, it's easy to um, connect with that. And I feel like those invisible disabilities kind of go not seen, kind of go under the radar. And we still have, I need a lot of research in how to really, again, how we were raised in Nigeria, how our education, well, I went to QC, how like being in school and how we're taught and how if the teacher is writing on the board or how you're educated, if you don't get it, you're dumb, all those little things. And so we never thought about dyslexia, we never thought about all the things that have to do with just being autistic. How do you feel in terms of the support those parents get? Has it increased? Is it available? Your findings anyway, how do you view that compared to individuals who have like physical disabilities, who need a wheelchair, who might
Uh,
need vision impairments, have vision impairments.
so I cannot draw comparisons,
Mhm,
and that's because I haven't set out to
mhm,
draw comparisons. And
mhm,
so I don't, if I were to draw comparisons, I think I'd be misinforming people. But
mhm,
let me just say, with parents of children who have neurodevelopmental disorders. Do I think they're accessing support? Yes, it's improving, but there's still a long way to go. That's the best way to put it. I can't tell you that it's zero. Clearly, from the time I started with the Winford Centre till now, there's been improvements in terms of, the number of people I see talking about these conditions, the number of organizations, small organizations talking about this and looking for ways to support families. These numbers have increased. So I think the awareness is increasing, but I think there's still a long way to go, because even within the space of what currently exists, it's still, challenges upon challenges. For instance, maybe the quality of professionals that are in the space. What are people getting? Also, when you take your child to a school and they tell you that the school is inclusive, are they necessarily inclusive? Are they just taking the child and, putting the child in a corner just because they want your money, or are they really going to support? So there are serious issues in the space. But I tell you something, there are also things that are working. And let me digress a little bit. So in 2020, yes, which was when that was when I started the year of the pandemic. I launched a podcast called Inclusive Education Simplified. The purpose at that time was to find a way to simplify the concept of inclusive education for teachers, trainers, people in sub-Saharan Africa. Then pandemic happened, Ph.D happened, and I left it, and I didn't touch it. After 2 years, or say 1.5 years, and my thinking has changed. I decided to revisit it and instead focus on what are the things that are working. We could spend forever on all of the things that are not working and we will not finish. But what are the things that are working that we can leverage? And you will be surprised at the things that happen here. You will find, and this is so beautiful to say, Ijema, if whatever you focus on magnifies, if we focus on the problems, that will be magnified. We'll see lots of it. If we focus on what are some of the things that are working, we will find them. And I came across the school, right? This school is a low-cost school. But I tell you, in the school, they teach sign language. When I was speaking to the owner of the school, when I was recording that podcast, that particular interview, I had goosebumps. I was like, don't tell me this happens in my context. Why didn't I find it before? Because I wasn't looking for it. What was I focused on? I was focused on, this isn't happening, this isn't happening. I was focused on, it's not happening here. It's happening elsewhere. But there are people making it happen here. There are people who are using the little they have to make it happen. Look, it's not perfect, but perhaps we can look to these people and say, hey, what are you doing? And how can we support you? A school that charges 50,000 naira, maybe per term, maybe per annum, teaching sign language, taking on deaf students, that is a big deal. If you went to some of the big schools, they'd probably tell you, oh, sorry, we won't touch this. Look, let me tell you, there was a school that said to me, Miss Basirat, I understand, fancy school, big name school, quote and unquote, inclusive school. They said to me, oh, Miss Basirat, I understand, our parents maybe the teachers, but we don't have a budget for this. Okay, yes, budget might be an issue. We don't have a budget for this. And in terms of taking on children, we do not plan to take on children who have, disabilities. I'm like, so, within the school system, they already like set a limit to say, we're not going to take this one. And on the outside, you see the label, inclusive school. And I find that, really, truly misleading. So what am I saying? There are things here that are working, right? They may not be perfect, but I am now choosing to amplify those things so that anyone that's looking into this context and saying, how can we solve this problem? How can we solve this problem? Here, listen, people are doing this. How about we look into it and see if we can scale this? How can we support? So this school, for instance, that has the school teaches sign language, has trained the teachers in sign language. They have children who have hearing impairments. They have children with Down syndrome. They have children who have albinism. They have different categories of children with disabilities, maybe not a lot of them, but they are still supporting these children to the best of their abilities. So yes, it's not perfect. Parents are struggling, but also within the system, there are organizations, there are teachers, there are head teachers, they're proprietresses, mostly because I haven't met proprietors, I've met mostly women who are going out of their way to see how they can make it work. The thing about inclusive education, Ijoma, is it starts from the heart. Because if you have the heart right, it helps you to push past the obstacles, which I won't say may come, will come.
Yeah.
Particularly in contexts like ours, the obstacles will be there. When it comes to money, teachers, quality teachers, the training, all of those things, you will meet those troubles as you try to do this work. And so it is just having the heart in the right place to say, look, whatever it is, I have spoken to parents who've said, it is this chaos that is working. Somehow in the midst of all of this chaos, we found something to work. So you can either sit down and look at that chaos and say, this is all chaos, there's nothing good here. Or you can look at that chaos and say, actually, this chaos is also serving this group. Yeah. And so how can we unpack this, and bring out the good from the chaos and make it better?
Yeah. No, I absolutely can identify, and I love everything you're saying, because one thing for me, it's so interesting. I'm talking to you and I'm like, wow, a lot of the stuff that we're doing is so similar, but I'm like, I need to focus on Basirat and the conversation we're having. But I just want to just interject just a little bit, just because the similarities are so the same. And I know we're not the only, Nigerians or Africans who have the same, like idea and passion to want to help education in Nigeria. Like for me, what really struck a chord in me, like you said, was there was a student. It always starts with a student or a child, right? Sometimes, or an individual. There was a student, and I couldn't but think of all the other students in Nigeria. For me, when I see my students here come into class and they have a disability, and we can work with them, and with my training as a special education teacher, because for me, I'm like, okay, if I need to do this and I'm passionate about this, for me, the way to do it was I went back to school and I said, you know what? I don't have a degree in this. I don't know anything about it. I'm just hearing about it. I mean, my kids knew more about children with disabilities than I did. I was like, okay. So I went back to school and I worked with people who've been in the field for years. And I'm like, wow, we need this in Nigeria. And then my research, I'm like, we have a special needs policy in Nigeria. I'm like, of course, because you're in school, you are reading articles, I'm reading policies. I'm like, everything is there. But like you said, is the implementation. Okay, let's put that aside, because I also don't like to knock like Nigeria or the government. You know what? We know everything is bad. Everything is also not good in the quote unquote developed world. It's not good too. They have their own issues, so the grass is not green here I mean, don't get me wrong. I know, okay, light, water, all those Maslow's needs is there. I get that. But in terms of just seeing it from, okay, what can we use from what is good that's here, and how can we add to Nigeria, you know? And so my thing was, you know, like it's you can be, I'm sitting on the board of this organization, I'm helping that organization, but for me, I was like, I don't want any student to be turned away from a school because they don't have a sped teacher. So what I said, okay, what are we going to do? Just like you, like doing my schooling, I'm like, I'm going to start a foundation. And I know everybody started foundation here and there, but again, I saw a problem because I've sat in many special education classes and I see how it works. I see how inclusion is possible. I've seen students, minorities from underprivileged households do well because there is a teacher that led with empathy. There was a teacher who loved them. There was a teacher who didn't see the disability before they saw the child. And I'm telling you, children know when you love and you care for them. If you don't love and care for a child, they're not going to respond to your teaching. Anything you want to do, you can do what you want. They're not going to respond, you know? And it was just like, okay, how do and I'm grateful because I went to school and I'm doing my doctorate, you know, like I have a connection of, you know, African-American teachers, you know, who are the Latino teachers, white, all of them together, African. Let's see how we can partner with people on the ground in terms of inclusion, because like you said, I don't want it to be a situation where, you know, we talk about behavior, we talk about the context of, you know, let's remove the stigma away, but now let's actually focus on education. You know, like there's a reason why teachers do what they do, because they know they understand the curriculums, they know how to like create an environment, whether it's academic or environmental or with love, to make this child thrive, you know? So it's not a catch-all, like everyone being it. Like you actually have to like learn the processes of how this works. And so that's why I really, oh goodness, girl, I give you so much props to deciding to do not undergrad in disability. You jumped all the way to PhD to get it done so that you can really go into the roots to find out, okay, what's the problem, you know, or better yet, understand the problem and then figure out a solution. So I have a lot of respect for what you do. So my question is, you established the Winford Center, okay? It's obviously doing well, because I actually saw you in a couple of, you know, webinars and stuff, and I'm like, oh, okay. But it wasn't until like a year or two later that I saw you on Instagram, and I'm like, oh, this is the lady. And I was like, well, let's see. When I started a podcast, I'm like, well, let me see, you know, if she can come on this year. And so I'm grateful for that. So you started the Winford Center because you wanted to support women and children and just individuals who may have developmental disabilities and their families. So what is the mission and what's the vision of your organization? Because I want to get practical now. Like when people
Yeah.
come to your center, what can they gain? You know, if you can just, you know, give us like a short masterclass, a short masterclass of what you
Okay.
do.
So why do we exist?
Yes.
We exist to help parents navigate the journey from finding out that they have a child that needs additional support,
Yeah.
through to actually getting that support. And that is putting it in really simple terms. And why is that a focus for us? It is because when you speak to parents, what you hear, okay, so let's take it back to even the story I told, you know, about my situation.
Mhm.
It was, where do you find this? There wasn't really anyone to talk to. I didn't know who to talk to. And you find that consistently with parents. It's the number one thing you hear. I did not know who to talk to. And I think this might be in contrast to if you were in some other places, you know, that have systems and structures. Like if you feel something's not right with a child, you can maybe go to the GP. And I'll speak for the UK because that's where I'm familiar with that. I'm not too sure how that, you know, plays out in the US. I feel there's something not going on. I'll speak to the GP, and they'd refer me to whoever I need to be referred to. Now,
And the GP
understandably,
is
the general practitioner. So this is like your everyday doctor. So,
right.
you know, I have a headache, I'm going to the GP's practice. So this is the
Provider.
first, your primary provider. This is the first person that you go to. And if there are issues, so say maybe my child's not doing something well, I'll go to that place. And then if the GP feels that there's a need for referral, the GP can then refer to a bigger hospital, maybe the teaching hospital, you know, in my borough or in my council or wherever. But then they do the referral. And so there's a structure in place. At least now the problem is between the time I see the GP and when I actually, you know, have my child seen by a specialist, the waiting period might be long, and people complain about that. But you know that system exists. At least that structure is there, and it's quite different. And to back this up, there was a study that was done right in Lagos, and they found that the average age that parents first notice a difference in their children's that the parents notice, you know, a difference in their children's developmental milestones is around the age of 2. But the average age for getting a diagnosis of autism is 6. You will agree with me that that is a long time between first noticing and actually getting a diagnosis. Between the age of 2 and 6, what happens, you know, all of those years? So you have parents not knowing exactly what to do. And that is a gap that we are looking to fill, you know, that we exist to fill. Like, you've got questions. Look, I'm not sure about this. What do I need to do? Come ask us, we'll tell you. That's the first one. And then number 2 is, okay, now I have a diagnosis. Now what, right? We are not a school. We would not provide you with education. But now what? So in terms of parents now, ask us, we will help you navigate the journey.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, remember also at the beginning, I said, it was important to me that the work that we're going to do as a charity had impact. And I was concerned about big impacts. So and this is not to say helping one child is not important, not at all. But I was interested in, look, this is a big problem. Let's think about numbers. You know, let's think about numbers when we're trying to solve it, so that, you know, we're solving big. There are already structures that exist to support children. These are people who, for one reason or the other, don't let me say they have passion. It could be passion or any other reason. For one reason or the other, are supporting children. How can we get them to support more? So for me, that would be, you know, a bigger way to solve the problem than maybe setting up a center and just taking in 10, 20 children, right? If instead I support a school and they can take in, say, 50, and then I support 5 schools and they take in, you know, 50 each, just for the purpose of, you know, for conversation's sake, that's more children that can be supported using that model than if we just went out and said, we want to set up a place that can support maybe 10, 20 children. And I personally, I don't take the issue of, you know, childcare, child support, I don't take it very lightly at all. So I understand, I understand the work that goes into even raising my own kids. So for me, if you're going to set up anything to support any child, you have got to be, my standards are very high. And so I find it even problematic for myself. Like, if I have to meet those standards, I'm going to cater to only a small number of children. That isn't, you know, efficient use of these resources. Let's do it this other way. So it is helping parents navigate, and it is equipping people who are already working with children so that they can work with this other category of children. Now, it is impossible. It is impossible to say you want to support children with disabilities without supporting their families and in many instances their mothers. And so, because I also understand in doing, the preliminary research that parents face a lot of stigmatization as a result of having children with disabilities. The sacrifices are huge, all of that. So for me, it was how do you call this kind of package, like a multi-package. I wasn't going to do one without the other. Because who is the person who would take the child for therapy? Probably the parents or the caregiver.
Or the mom.
Who's the person who is going to, run around for education? Probably the mom. Not to say dads are not doing things, but we find this, they're
look at it
gendered
from a
roles.
cultural context, and be honest with it.
There are gendered roles, and we cannot shy away from that. And so for me, it was really important. And I told you, I was in groups. A lot of people I spoke with in those groups were women. So it was just important that, the woman would mostly be with the child because they carry a lot of, the childcare work. So let's do this together, support the mom, support the child. And so that is what we want to do. We want to break down societal barriers and stereotypes by providing education and welfare support services. So our work goes in 3 areas. We do awareness work, which is, pretty much advocacy, talk about this condition, what do people need to know, what do people need to do. Another strand of that is what we do with children now, which is, it falls predominantly under awareness. And by that, I'm talking about the children's books that I write. So I'm also an author. I'm a children's author. I write children's books. And what you'll find is if you don't start to engage kids early enough about these topics, they grow up to become the kind of adults we see now who are not aware. And so if we want to change things, don't just wait. And this was a realization that came after, the work with Winford Centre started. Like, you talk to some parents, you see comments like, if you beat the child, you reset the brain. So at some point I came to the conclusion that, look, these parents are more difficult to, change.
Yeah, I would.
So whilst we work on these parents, let's start with this other category. If these parents are the ones talking to these children, these are probably the type of things that they're passing on to these children. We don't want that to happen. So let's start with these children and start to educate them. And that was why I started writing those books. So at least children are engaging with these topics. We are naming it. We're not saying this or that, hiding on no, we're naming it. This is what it looks like. This is what it might feel like in your classroom. They can identify with it. So we have that awareness program going on. Then we have the training program. The training program is the one that, we've done consistently, where we just train educators, mainly, teachers, just train them, identifying those things in the classroom. Because look, let's not kid ourselves. There's no inclusion without teachers. Take out teachers from inclusion, you're left with what? Inclusive education, no teachers. So they are also critical to achieving anything when it comes to inclusive education. So we have the training aspect going on. We have a conference which started in 2020. We're going to be having another one this year, and this is where we have the conversation. Let's engage with the research. Let's engage with the problems. Let's sit together. Sort of like a stakeholders get together. Let's identify that. Let people talk about what issues that they're facing. And so the part that is just beginning to, let's say, take form is the parent part, where beyond just helping them navigate, the journey, is to give them additional support, one-on-one support through their own personal experiences of raising those children and educating them. So really, that is what we serve to do. It's a lot. for the Winford Centre, it's a lot to do. And I cannot tell you, that we have everything done, tick, 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 tick. No, we are also on a journey. We're a small organization, but we're growing and we're focused. So.
Yeah. So what kind of practical resources do you have for educators in terms of educating students with disabilities in, it's probably not just Nigeria, because I know that you do a lot on the concept of Africa. What kind of resources and help, and just to help teachers implement what inclusion should look like?
So really, it's the training programs that we organize, and the training programs are usually free because they're paid for. We have people who donate and sometimes sponsor the training programs. So it is the training programs that we organize, and we encourage people to attend. And sometimes also we sponsor other training programs. So we sponsor teachers to other training programs. For instance, yes, we're focused on neurodevelopmental disorders, but a project that we've consistently supported in the past is cerebral palsy. So because there are times that you also have overlaps, comorbidities. A child can have cerebral palsy and they can also have autism. Sometimes these things happen together, or they can have cerebral palsy and some other thing. So we can sometimes also send teacher collaborate with other providers, training providers, and sponsor teachers to go on those training programs. But we are heavily focused on training for teachers, and that's how we support them.
Nice. So I was going to bring up your books, and I had seen that you authored 2 books. I like the one with the dragon. I enjoy that. So what made you come up with that book title? For
the dragon one?
Yeah.
Unfortunately, I wanted to get a copy and then and just show it, but I don't have one to hand. So why dragons? It was just, I wanted something that children
as
could...
dragons can sing, right, or something like that.
Yes, yeah. It is. Dragons can sing. It's just something that children can relate with. And in a way, you can say there's a bit of bias, because sometimes I look at what my kids are learning at school and I think of, what is that character that isn't just spoken about, but now in hindsight, I'm thinking, perhaps some children don't get to learn about dragons. Maybe a dragon wouldn't have been a universal character, but I wanted something that was neutral. I wanted something that had distinctive abilities that was seen as strength. So, the whole fire breathing ability and all of that. And I wanted something that was going to make the difference, noticeable, remarkable, so that they can relate with it and just it would resonate with them in terms of maybe things that they're struggling to do and how to accept themselves,
acceptance is nice.
Completely. So really, that was what led to the dragon one.
I love it.
I'm not sure I'm going to write anything about dragon again.
No. Well, I will say though, it's catchy, and what you said about acceptance is so true, because we need to teach, our Nigerian children how to accept who they are and to love who they are, even despite whether they don't get that love from family or from friends or the school. That self-awareness of love really starts on the inside, and it starts from the home and the parents really accepting and supporting. And because they know the parent support, children can build on that. So what you're doing really is so important for our community. And someone might say, well, there's so many inclusive education things going on, but we're talking about the context of Africa, especially in Nigeria. We have to be the one to help, contribute to the awareness that's already being spread on the continent, in our country. And I mean, the more the merrier, right? There's power in numbers. There's power in numbers. So if you're doing what I'm doing, I'm so grateful for the organizations that I've worked with, because it's not even a competition. It's like, look, we have a problem, and not one of you can solve it by yourself. We have to solve this together. And I'm so glad to see so many organizations, just at least the ones that I've worked with. I'm very fortunate, because I know it's not like that everywhere. But we have to work together, because if we, if our voices can be elevated, we do it together. Definitely, there's going to be a change. I have so much hope for Nigeria.
I do
Nigeria
too.
will not
I
budge.
do.
No,
not under our
not
watch.
under our watch. I'm telling you, I always talk about my principals, like the schools that I work with, and my principal says, "So what do you want to do? You're doing this one, you're doing that one." I said, "Well, at the core of it, though, is special needs in Nigeria. That's the core. But I know that I'm learning from here. I know I'm learning, and I want to learn also from Nigeria. But if we can merge both, oh gosh, I see so much beauty in it. So." It's one day at a time. My supervisor said,
yes.
IJ, come down here. Just graduate. Remember your research. You can always have more research when you're done. I said, oh, you're right. Okay, let's just graduate. Let's just graduate. But thank you so much, Basirat, for just it was such a pleasure to talk to you. You're definitely a great speaker. I enjoyed listening to you. I enjoyed all the information that you shared. I enjoyed, just seeing your passion through the screen. And I'm sure because of our field, we're definitely going to run into each other and, maybe do some things in the future, but I'm
going
so
to reach
happy.
out to you. Now I'm going to reach out to
definitely. Honestly,
let's exchange resources.
I agree. Like me, I know my lane. My lane is teaching and speds. Everything else, I'm not a specialist, but this lane, no. I know this lane and I can work this lane. And that's all that matters, I'm not trying to do everything, just this one. But thank you so much. Thank you so much for being on the show. Thanks for listening to Miss IJ's Kids Inclusive Podcast this week. If you haven't subscribed yet, please do so on our website at www.ijpopoola.com. Or if you want to write to us about topics you would love to hear covered on the show, the email address is popoloijelma@gmail.com, one word. And if you'd like to follow us on our social media pages, it's at Miss IJ's Kids. I am IJ Popoola, and you've listened to Miss IJ's Kids Inclusive Podcast.